Welcome to Beacon Bits. I'm your co-host, Serge Boudreau, and every episode I will be joined by my co-host, Yves Boudreau. We delve into the world of work from the employer and employee viewpoint. Kick back, relax, and let's talk work. Beacon Bits starts right now. Welcome to our first podcast. I'm Serge Boudreau, and I'm here with Yves Boudreau. So, Yves, who are you?
Well, name's Yves Boudreau, serial entrepreneur, and right now the CEO of CareerBeacon, and alongside essentially the same company. And I've been doing this my whole life. I've only been employed for about 5 years of my 20 plus years in the professional sector. I've signed my own checks for the majority of my professional life.
Yeah, when you say you've never worked for anyone or you only work for someone for 5 years, is it because no one would ever hire you?
Oh yeah, I've come to the conclusion, and my wife will say the same thing now, is that I am unemployable. Like even my mom now believes that as well. So at one point she always thought I'd be a great artist or designer, which I've dabbled in, but now I think she knows I'm unemployable. So that's why I do what I do, because no one will hire me.
Isn't that the case with most entrepreneurs? They're not hireable, so they start their own business.
I think so. There's definitely a rebel element to it. I think I didn't set out to do my own thing my whole life, especially after I failed miserably with my first company. I had never really thought I'd go back at it. I don't know. I think everyone has different fabrics that kind of bring them to where they are in life. And some people, it takes them to the entrepreneurship route. Others very happy working a job and supporting their family and still doing something they're passionate about if they're lucky. So I feel very fortunate. I've gone gray much quicker than expected. And as you can see, my hair is not as full as it used to be, but I still love all of it. I still love everything that came, the good, the bad, the ugly.
For the listeners, I'm Serge Boudreau. I also work at CareerBeacon. I'm the vice president of BD. I also have a very popular podcast called A Recruitment Flex. This whole podcast, Yves, is really talking about this industry when we talk about hiring. We're going to tell real stories that happen in the real world, even when we have screwed up in the past or when we hear of screw ups. But we're also going to share some inspiring stories of how companies have done it really well, and hopefully you get some insights from it. So, Yves, I think the most interesting story that we can have on our first episode is your journey in scaling and hiring in multiple companies. You started alongside when?
The planning, building part of it, probably 2012. And it was mostly Ben and myself working off hours, sometimes on Sundays. We were pretty committed. We actually rented a boardroom every Wednesday in town to meet up after work for a few hours and continue the work, continue the next steps. But we did it while we were both fully employed for almost a year until we made the full jump. But even before alongside, this is my second company. So I started my first company when I was 19. It was called Halation Studios, which was a terrible name.
And what does that even mean?
Halation is actually a light that you can only see through a camera lens.
Okay, there you go.
So it's actually come up a few times since then. And I think there's actually other brands that kind of use it now. But at the time, we were just so advanced, ahead of our time. But yeah, the whole concept of halation was that we saw certain things that our regular customers maybe didn't see, but it was a terrible name. And my first company, everyone that I hired was friends I went to college with.
Yeah, that's interesting because I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and that's the story. Their first company is someone they met in college or someone they met at their first job, and they just start a company. So at what point did you meet Ben, your co-founder of Alongside? Did you meet him at your first company or?
Yeah, not working together in the same company, but we were really good at design and front end. And he was working at another development company that was more tailored to the back end. And so we did a lot of collaborative projects together. I didn't know him that much. We hung out a few times here and there, but I always had such a respect for how much shit he took, essentially, because clients would want changes at the last minute, especially this is the early 2000s. Tech is still not really where it needs to be. And Ben was just cool as cucumber the whole way through, and
that hasn't changed.
That hasn't changed at all. Cool. So it always stuck with me. And so when I decided to start Alongside, I was looking for a technical co-founder, And even though I don't think I had talked to Ben for years at that point in time, and I just reached out to Ben. I was like, hey, what are you up to? And he's like working at a company as one of their developers. And I was like, do you want to start a business with me? And he said yes right away. And he quit his job. But no, he wasn't like that. Yeah, I think it took 6 months for him to make the jump. He wanted to wait till we were at a point where he felt really good about the idea, the concept before, because he had family and security. And so, but yeah, so that's how I met Ben through work before. But it's funny, sometimes like you just meet people, and even though I didn't really hang out with Ben, I just knew he had great work ethic. And I needed someone who was the opposite of me. so, so, which I think you could confirm.
I'll confirm, complete opposites. And it makes me wonder, because I've always thought, hey, if I start a business, how would I recruit a co-founder? Like, how would you recruit a technical or a co-founder for an entrepreneur? How do you approach that?
It's tough. Like I mentor a few companies, and that's always been the challenge. You got to be out there. You got to meet people. You got to find ways to pay attention. If you're working at a company, pay attention to your colleagues. They could be your next future co-founder. But yeah, for me, I was just lucky. And it was weird because Ben always stood out for me. I only met a few people like Ben in my life that I'm just like, I would absolutely go to war with those individuals, right? They're just wired differently. There's all kinds of stuff out there. There's co-founder dating things in the Valley. They used to do events where like speed dating, where like you could go to these networking events to try to find a co-founder for your business. Sometimes it would be someone super technical and you would need someone with a business background and vice versa. So I've just been really fortunate that I've worked with some really great people over the years. I don't know if Ben would say the same thing from his perspective if he was on this show.
Oh, probably not. He'd be like, what the hell did I do? You know, I've never had a co-founder, but I had a similar experience when I started a podcast and needed a partner for the podcast. And when you're looking at it, it's like, who is the opposite of who you are, but has the skills that you need? And that's how I got to Shelly. Like I've known Shelly for a long time, but I never worked with her. But I knew exactly her work ethic. I knew her knowledge, which was just a big driving factor. And I knew that I would get along with them, because a startup or anything that you're starting from scratch, there's going to be a lot of hard times, right? And if your co-founder is not aligned, if you don't like them, things can go sideways pretty quickly. I would imagine there's horror stories out there, especially like in Silicon Valley, of co-founders just like going their separate ways and it being nasty.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time researching. Like I spent a year and a half figuring out I didn't want to do the same mistakes with my first company, which really did result in my own personal bankruptcy for me. There were some good things about it. There's things that I obviously carried over, but I didn't want to like just repeat the same mistakes. And one of my biggest strengths is I build networks like crazy, like connections, and I leverage people that have done it before just to understand how they did it, what they did differently. Sounds trivial, but one of the big things that co-founders do is money becomes like a reason for, especially when things are difficult or any real situation. But Ben and I made it right away. Like we agree that we would always pay each other the same salary. So it would never be a question of one is more valuable than the other. And I hear stories afterwards of co-founders who haven't done that. And then this jealousy that starts to creep in, because how do you really measure the effort of one person versus the other? And so while Ben doesn't have the CEO title, like he's done a lot of CEO type functions with the company, but we've been through so much that, honestly, I don't know how many co-founders would have gone through the things we've gone through if they hadn't had a good starting point in their agreements in the early days.
I agree. How about we jump to your first hire at Alongside? First of all, what did you know about hiring during that time? It was still early in your career. Who was that first hire? And let's talk about what your process was back then.
Process. I've been pretty good at reading people in general. Even like when I started my first company, the friends that I hired, it's funny because RJ is essentially one of my best friends. He was my best man at my wedding. I was his best man at his wedding. But in college, like we didn't talk to each other. He was like a skater guy. I was like a metal goth dressed in black every day. We were just in two separate crowds and nothing in common. But we were always the last guys in the computer rooms at night. Like school would be done, college would be done, everyone would go home, and we're still like learning how to use the tools. We're still learning how to code, how to design. And similar to Ben, when I started the company, I just remember like, oh, I got to talk to RJ because he's got incredible work ethics and I want to have someone like that on my team. And he's still an amazing person today. And pretty much everyone that I've hired that day have turned out to be all super talented individuals in their own careers today. But with this company, I didn't want to hire friends, if that makes any sense. Because the downside of hiring friends is that when things get difficult, you don't want to have some of the conversations you need to have.
Yeah.
And while I knew Ben, we didn't hang out. So it was like there was still some separation there. But my first hire was also someone I'd never met before. But
Mm.
it was the same thing. I was at a workshop for an accelerator, and Aaron, the guy running the workshop, I was really impressed with him. Like, he was really articulate. He was very organized, and he was also very knowledgeable in the content he was talking about. And I literally talked to him after the workshop that he was facilitating. I said, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" We talked it out, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Just looking for opportunities, doing some contract work here and there." I was like, "Do you want to work with us? We don't have a ton of money to pay you, but we're starting a company from the ground up. And we don't know exactly what your role is going to be yet. It's probably going to be a little bit of everything, but we'll figure it out." That was the interview. Yeah, so he was our first hire. He was with us for over 5 years, and he started off as literally a jack of all trades, but he was really good with customers. He was really good at understanding technology with real world problems, very passionate about the pain points we were trying to solve. I couldn't tell you today where he went to school still or anything like that. I don't even remember if he ever even gave me a resume.
Have you
But
ever seen a resume?
oh yeah.
At
Have
least
you?
one? Have you hired someone with a resume? It looks like you're just like picking people off the street here.
I will tell you that I don't know where most people on the team have gone to school, if that
Yeah.
makes
Well, that shows the importance of that right now. And we're seeing that way more, dropping degree requirements. No one cares where you went to school, especially not 20 years after, right?
it also depends on what you do. Like,
Yeah.
I'm hoping that my heart surgeon will have gone to school.
Yeah,
Uh,
my pilot too.
yeah, your pilot.
Yes, I
Uh,
agree with that. Yes.
yeah, I vividly remember the first 5 people that, Mike, who's our longest standing team member now outside of Ben and I, celebrated 10 years with us. Again, same work ethic, same thing. Just like,
How
I
did you
didn't know
find
her.
Mike?
We hired him as a contractor originally. He came recommended from a common connection, and we hired him as a contractor. The story with Mike is crazy, but I won't get into it too much. But he was about to take an offer from someone else. I didn't know. And then he got a message he wasn't supposed to get. Anyway, it was a little crazy, but ended up working out. Serendipitously, it was like really a really good situation, because I was like, "Hey, if you're about to take an offer from someone else, we need to talk before you do that." And the offer that he was getting from the other company was way better than what we were giving him. Like, but what was important for him, he had young kids. He wanted flexibility with home to be able to take care of his family, vacation time, those types of things. So we worked it out with him to give him things that financially we couldn't give him. But we're like, "Look, do what you need to do as you run your life while you're doing the work. Like, it's fine."
Well, and I think that's the perfect example of when you're competing with big brands or competing with anyone, you got to figure out what the key things for that candidate. And if flexibility was for a company your size to get top talent, you're not competing in pay, you're not competing in stock options, but flexibility is the one thing that you saw. Hey, this is how we can get this candidate. There's other things too, right? This is where being honest and transparent, especially if you're a small startup and you need high level employees, build like an incredible value proposition. Be like, hey, you can work anytime. We're flexible anytime, anywhere. Just get the work done. That type of arrangement. You've done that. I've seen you do that across the board, even building out CareerBeacon. You've been very flexible to get some really impressive talent. I think of Ryan. So Ryan moving to Japan, he's our head of product. That flexibility for him and having the ability to work with us is impressive, right? Not a lot of companies would do that, but it puts us in a really competitive space because we offer that amount of flexibility.
I was thinking about what you were saying, and sometimes you don't realize at that point it sounds trivial. Maybe it is, especially now more so than ever. I think the
Yeah.
flexibility side of it is an advantage for us. I look back at some of the people that we brought in, and I think like the common denomination was they didn't feel valued where they were before. They were contributing highly performing individuals in their previous roles, and there was just clear evidence that they were not valued. And so part of the proposition for me was like, there's nowhere other than a startup with 5 people where you're going to
Yeah.
feel valued and where your voice is going to be heard, where you're going to have influence on where we're going. And so I think looking back, I think that was part of it. And I look for certain traits in the early days that I don't know that I look for as much anymore too.
Yeah.
So
Like
that's
what?
another part of it as well. I look for individuals who I could sense had a ton of potential, and sometimes maybe didn't see it in themselves, but I would see it. I would see it just in interacting with them. And a lot of times they were able to get there. And it's always rewarding to see someone, the growth that they achieve, to see someone's confidence go up, not only at work, but like in their personal lives. I've seen it with many people that worked here. It's one of my favorite things, but it can also be difficult because it's pouring a lot of energy sometimes into individuals who have the skills, but to get them to get to that point, like they're not necessarily always putting the same level of passion that you sometimes have for what they're capable of doing, if that makes any sense. But I think for the most part, definitely there's been some bumps in the road, to say the least, in terms of like hiring history. But common denominator for me has always been empathy as well. I hired a lot of people who show empathy because we're in the space of helping humans. We're in the business of helping people find opportunities, helping employers find opportunities. And so for me, we can't do that and not have people who are empathetic in the organization, who care about the well-being of others. And I'll say this as an example, as the last one, but like Nora, who was employee number 5, I believe. I remember when we interviewed her, she was volunteering and teaching newcomers English who were coming to the community. She wasn't getting paid. She was doing it because she wanted to help people who joined the Moncton community get more comfortable with the English language. And she was doing it on the off hours on her own. And for me, I was like, okay, this is a type of young person who's still enjoying life, doing the things that young people do,
Yeah.
but also cares about their fellow human beings. So for me, like, those were things that I was looking for.
It's interesting because you mentioned 6 things that are very fluffy HR terms, like empathy. I now understand that you've been in the HR industry for 10 years. Like they've softened you up, right? But I'm joking. I know that's how you approach it. I've seen it firsthand, but I love that you're getting the HR lingo here. I think that's great.
I was ahead. I was saying those words before HR was saying
Oh,
those
were
words.
you? Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was pre-HR.
well, let's talk about now today, or maybe let's go back 2 years. So alongside, you had a journey for 5-6 years, then you got the opportunity to acquire CareerBeacon, and that's a whole story in itself. And I think we can have that in a future episode. So you started 4 and you got to 20 employees probably in, what was it, like 5 months, 6 months?
I think it was quicker than that.
Yeah, it seemed like a whirlwind. You hired a lot of people. If you had to do it again, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the context I would add to that is we were like alongside prior to the acquisition of CareerBeacon, the largest we had ever been was 14 employees.
Okay.
And that was peak size. And that was like in 2018, 2019. Without getting into the specifics of it, things just got really difficult for us as an organization. And we went down to 4 employees at the time of making this acquisition. And with the acquisition, we were taking on 6 original employees from CareerBeacon that had been there for a significant amount of time. And we were also hiring to fill certain gaps that we knew right away we would need. So I believe that we went from being 4 on a Friday to being 12 on a Monday. And it doesn't sound like you hear of companies who are hiring 50, 100 employees at a time. But when you're at that scale, like you're essentially like multiplying your
Yeah.
team, 3, 4x, like within, a few weeks. So to answer your question, I have a habit of just like sometimes just pulling the trigger and figuring things out later. I think I would try to figure out a few things ahead of time. It was exciting. We were going from a company revenue wise as well. We were essentially 4xing, 5xing our revenue overnight. Even hiring you, like terrible mistake.
Worst decision you've ever made. You never looked at my resume. That was the problem.
Yeah, exactly. I never looked at your resume and I didn't check your references. So, but lesson learned. Yeah, I'll never do it again. No, the reason I'm bringing you is you were an example of someone we didn't know that we needed immediately, because you and I got on the podcast to talk about the acquisition on the Recruitment Flex. We really hit it off. And I was really impressed by how much you knew about the industry, the connections you had. And I don't know, it was just natural. It was easy. And obviously you have a lot of history in sales as well at Workopolis, or the way I used to say it,
Workopolis?
Workopolis, and Indeed. And so I was like, when we acquired CareerBeacon, I wanted to have someone to help manage the sales team, but also implement more sophisticated processes, industry subject matter expertise, all things that I felt CareerBeacon needed if it was going to go from what it was known as for the last 20 years to
Yeah.
where we wanted to take it. So there was you, and then there was other positions that were like, oh yeah, we should hire this role. Well, and yeah, we should add another person here, and we should add. So we quickly went from 4 to 20 or 21, like you said, within a few weeks, few months, which seemed manageable because like you're thinking, okay, revenues can support it.
Yeah.
But what you don't realize is as soon as you go that quickly, especially in this instance, we're essentially merging three cultures,
Yeah.
like work cultures. We're merging the alongside work culture that's been around for, at that point, probably about 8 years. And
Yeah.
then you bring in the team that's coming in from CareerBeacon. And then you're also bringing in new people in the mix. And so that's the part I think, if I look back, that's the part that I think I underestimated. I figured, you know what? It's still, at the end of the day, at the core, it's still alongside, it's still startup
Yeah.
culture. And I think there was some things there that I wasn't ready for. And yeah.
Well, it was, I think anytime you're scaling a company like 3 times, there's going to be an amount of chaos. It's really good if you're starting to hire, you're putting your job ads out there and you're sourcing people to really figure out the culture that you want and be very clear as well that what's going to suck, because you don't want to be putting the same message as General Motors would do. It's going to be different. There's going to be chaos. There's going to be uncertainty. There's going to be tough days. There's going to be days that you're going to wonder, hey, are we going to make payroll? Like all of these things are, as an employee, you got to know what you're getting yourself into. And for a lot of folks, it's not for them. And that's okay, right? Would
Yeah.
rather not go through the process. They get hired 6 months in and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for this. I'm built for a larger company. So I think a piece of advice here for anyone listening is be very clear. And even if it's not rosy, just be truthful. Like, what are the true behaviors that happen in a day, right? Is it a party hard, play hard type culture? Is it a place that we don't expect you to work more than 9 to 5 and you go home and you take care of what you need to? But I think for a startup like you, that's pretty clear. Even talking to you, like I knew there was going to be a level of chaos here because you're acquiring a company. You knew the industry because you were in it alongside, but like job board space is a little bit of a different place, two-side marketplace. You're adding all of these and you're building a lot of people. Yeah, I knew there was going to be chaos. And I think pretty much everyone else. But I was always curious about the folks that came from CareerBeacon, owned by JDI, which is one of the biggest companies in Canada, and coming to a startup culture, right? It's fascinating to see that happening.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. First of all, you're right as far as like seeing the chaos. That's why we hired you, because you're clearly so brilliant and understand everything that is going
Yes,
on in the
exactly.
space. I know that you knew because you warned me a few times of some of the challenges of going to the job board space, the dual-sided market space. But I'm like, when someone tells me I can't do something, I'm kind of the opposite. So if you need me to get something done, just tell me I can't do it.
Okay.
So
I'm taking that. I'm writing that down as notes.
yeah, I can't. My wife sometimes, I bet you can't do the laundry right now. Watch it.
Eve, I bet you can't give me a raise. I bet you that you just can't get that done.
Yeah, no, but I've changed. I've changed as of this last
Oh,
moment here.
as
As of like 30 seconds ago. Yeah. Without isolating necessarily just the folks who came over from CareerBeacon in this conversation, I think startups in general seems appealing. It seems sexy from an outside lens. And we've had people before because we always had like a cool place to work at. We always invested in creating a really good environment for people to enjoy our previous space. Was very chill, laid back, open concepts, couches for meetings, like ping pong tables. It's not something, especially in Moncton, New Brunswick, it's not a very common kind of setting.
yeah.
And we had a lot of people would just drop by, be like, oh, I'd love to work here. And a couple of times we took people up on those offers, people who really seemed to be very excited and passionate
Mhm.
about wanting to be part of the team, to quickly realize that they wasn't for them. Just a learning curve and just the pace of things. There's not even pros and cons. That's just a reality of, yes, the startup gives you certain benefits that you don't get, but there's also certain expectations that you don't have at other
Yeah.
organizations. So I think there's still some challenges there on that front today. Many people on a team were to go to other startups or other fast growth company, I think they would realize that from a pace perspective, we're moving faster than an average company, but we're still not moving at breakneck pace that certain organizations are. And I'm not saying that one's better than the other, but yeah, it's not for everyone. That's what it comes down to. The main difference I would say with startups versus a company is one, a lot of times you own a bit of a piece of it.
Yeah.
But oftentimes as well, when you have something you're trying to solve, it doesn't turn off at 5 p.m. Like you
That's
don't go home. And it's not just a CEO, it's a lot of people in the team. And it's not me saying, hey, you need to work overtime and solve this problem. But if people are invested in the company and the team and the problems that we're trying to solve, the culture of startups is really like people that are really passionate about solving pain points. And so they're still thinking about it. They're still reading on things. They're still trying to come up with solutions at night so that they can come back to work the next day and start their day with some things to try out or solutions to whatever blockers they have. I think that's the biggest difference.
You might be right, Yves. But on that note, I think we've talked enough. So this concludes our first episode. So for the audience, thank you for being patient with us.